Good morning. Thanks very much for inviting us here, and thanks very much to all of you here. I'm really excited about the whole 2 days. It's going to be great, I'm sure. We're here to talk about research processes within the Heritage Futures project. The Heritage Futures is obviously part of the Heritage theme funded by the HRC, and 4 universities are participating: UCL, Linnaeus University in Sweden, University of York, and University of Exeter. And we are here really to talk about the way that heritage is not always about the past, but is really always about the future. Here's a sign from Carisbrooke Castle, which Heritage has recently restored a garden, and it records their gratitude to Mrs. Dorothy Fraser, who has, back in Genesis, enabled the creation of the garden for future generations to enjoy. I was quite disappointed when I saw this sign, because I was hoping to enjoy the garden myself. We don't even notice when we say that heritage is for the future. We don't even notice when we say it, and since we don't notice that we're saying it, we don't ask what we mean when we say it. In this project, that's what we're doing. And we're doing it in a comparative perspective. So we're looking at different domains of practice, some of which may be considered heritage in the classical sense, some not. And we're working with practitioners from those different fields of practices. We work across 4 different themes. The first one is uncertainty. That's my theme. I'm Sarah May. Then we have Nadia Bartolini. She works on the transformation theme. Then we have Jenny Morgan, who works on the perfusion theme, and Saffron Penrose, who works on the diversity theme. But at the end of the day, all of these different themes are really exploring heritage as a future-making practice.
Hang on, what do you mean when you say future-making?
Nadia, you know what she means, it's in the bid.
Has they put on the website?
We rarely consider how different ways of assembling, curating, caring for, and designing the future relate to one another. Opportunities to open dialogue between and across these domains have largely been overlooked. Each domain has come to be defined by specific activities carried out by particular institutions, more or less in isolation from one another. Current global crises and transformations, from climate change to mass migration, highlight the need to develop more sustainable and resilient future-making practices and encourage different areas of interest to pursue common goals and learn from one another.
Okay, but on the website, the Profusion says that we're addressing the challenge presented by the abundance of material and digital stuff for assembling the future archive. We look at what is and what is not kept for posterity, and we do so by investigating 2 domains in the UK, homes and museums.
But on the uncertainty theme, it says heritage is often said to be the human legacy preserved for the benefit of future generations. However, it typically remains unclear precisely when these future generations will live and how we can make the right decisions in the present with their best interests in mind.
The diversity theme explores ethnographically a range of practices, categorization, preservation and management undertaken across various different heritage domains, which share an aim in the maintenance of ecological, cultural, linguistic and biological diversity and the values associated with these practices.
The transformation theme seeks to document how the practice of cultural remembrance can be sustained with materials and landscapes that are allowed to undergo active processes of transformation. To do that, we're looking at different values associated with structures and landscapes.
Please note that attached for your approval, business cards have a set format with your proof being the example.
Dear Sharon, please find attached an agenda for our meeting on Monday. I've updated this to take into account the resident voted
upgradable rather than premium exchange.
Please find attached directives application.
Because these were reasonably expensive,
for 4 year
what would be helpful is if you could ask him to put exit row seats.
Assembly alternative features for heritage.
This sounds really interesting, and I would love to go, but unfortunately the dates coincide.
1. Workshop event update, including our facilitators' input and practical matters. Please note, the transport and hotels for our speakers are now arranged. Catering, layout and equipment for the day are yet to be sorted.
You should have received
Julia is visiting the host, meaning you have
registered to attend the IUCN conference.
As well as the application, I attached the information sheet for project participants, the consent form, the letters of support and our project partners, as outlined in the application itself.
To the UI.
2 hard copies following the post.
Field work!
Osmond Asdal in the departure lounge of Svalbard Airport, we discuss endangered languages, archival practices and problems of data.
In addition to me using the diary scheduling meeting as a useful way to see what activities and tasks the team are working on for the week, and for me to communicate to the team what my activities are.
So for you, it's heritage, both natural and cultural. That's right, because the landscape that we have right now.
But she has such interesting things to say about the future right away, but I'm sorry I can't remember this now. I'm typing here, I'm going to, so it's still a paragraph. So she's on 3 different plots of land. She's on this plot separately. And when she has money at the same time, will now become very breakthrough occupation.
It's a scales challenge.
Osmond dismissed the idea of the seed bank as a point in time. Seeds are developed, harvested.
This is interesting to me, the kinds of aspirational connections that people might make constantly with their stuff with museums is often a collection of donations and
In the landscape, there is a
She said that it is in the area, because they were taking the water, which case it's much more like centuries in the region, small blocks of land, and come from, there's so many people who take the Lake District.
Action point.
I feel so isolated.
So how do you see this area in 50 years? I cannot imagine Algornach in 50 years, but if I could, I'd like to find Algornach
The oldest seed
where I
bank
found
in
it
the world
when I
is in
came
St.
back from Mozambique.
Scientists travelled around collecting seeds.
Is offering a collection for donation a way of creating links and embedding oneself into a new place before physically relocating? Sending a collection onwards to the
A plot of 2 acres that she might use for keeping a type of land recently sold at her value for £64,000. Land is around £2,000 and up to £10,000 with £64,000.
Visual methods.
Fields of the bin.
How do we import final cut?
I'm really struggling with all of this.
Now it's time for ice cream. Or maybe some nuts. A cool glass of orange. Why not try a hot dog? Or the real thing, a cool, refreshing Coca-Cola. From the sales staff and in the foyer. Now.
Mean by future making?
I think we may all come at it differently from each of our work packages. So in a way, we're all contributing to the term. We're all contributing to the concept.
Yeah, it's difficult because we don't get together to talk face to face very often about these ideas. The monthly Skype, but it's not really the same, is it? And it's really a snappy phrase that needs unpacking, and we're the ones to unpack it. I think in the bid, it really means something about a world in practice, that everyday practice doesn't just happen in the present. It creates pasts and it creates futures. It goes beyond really having consequences to being something that's a creative act. And we are the people, we have to end up being the ones to do the empirical work on all of that. So for example, in my field work, looking at the practices of the future making in the Lake District, I find not all of them, even those working with nuclear waste, are focused on the long term. It's really a mix.
I'd agree with what you're saying, Sarah. I think it's all really interesting points. And I think what you're talking about, I've just come out of a period, particularly sustained period of fieldwork at a museum, and I've been very focused on the fine-grained empirical details of everyday practice, both in homes and museums, associated with these future-keeping decisions. So, for example, at museums, I've been sitting in on acquisition meetings for new proposals. For acquisitions, I've been following curators as they undertake processes of review and rationalisation. And what I find is that sometimes it can be quite difficult to sort of zoom out from these practical details that I'm immersed in and connect to these overriding, very big questions about future making. And yet these practices, as you're saying, are clearly future orientated. So I think that a goal that we all share and that I share with you as I continue sustained analysis on these materials is indeed to further unpack these points of intersection between and consider how these practical and technical activities are creating futures.
That's what I really value in your work, Jenny, is that fine-grained detail and that focus on it. I often find when I'm working with my participants that these wide, large-scale ideas that we bring in are not what people are doing, and to bring them in directly ends up feeling like you're coming in with a sledgehammer.
I feel really stuck between this fine grain and this sledgehammer idea, because for me, our participants, our project partners, are the repositories of the knowledge that we're working with. They're, by and large, big institutions, the Seed Bank in Svalbard, the Language Centre at SOAS, and they have whole fields behind them collecting this knowledge. They have working practices that they've developed over years, just like we've developed our own. And I find it difficult to walk in there and be the sledgehammer that gives them the critique.
I think that's a really good point, this critique versus critical. I think it's important for us to reassure professionals and partners that we work with that our research is not about critiquing their work and approaches. We understand the constraints and frameworks they must work under, but what we're aiming for is to critically reflect the normative heritage practices out there, feeding it back and assessing it not only with each other by learning through our different disciplinary backgrounds, but also with our partners, because our work allows their self-reflection to be part of the process.
I agree, but I want to pick up on that phrase that Seth used about repositories of knowledge, because in some ways we're also the repositories of the research. When the project was approved, the bid went in, the document held the project in that nice tiny way, but as it unfolds into us and we become the repositories.
I'd absolutely agree with what you're saying, and I think what you're talking about is how in this kind of research process where we're using collaborative and interventional methodologies with each other, our field sites and the project partners, is that we in some ways do become these repositories of the research. We almost come to embody it through our methodologies, and I guess what I mean by that is that we become instruments in our fieldwork practice. So we move through sites, talking to people, observing, recording, filming, sensing and experiencing, and that's all incredibly productive and generative of empirical materials. As an anthropologist, that really resonates with me in terms of my disciplinary training. I very much use my reflexive experiences and interactions with participants and field sites as my primary research tool. But I think it does raise really challenging questions beyond the specifics of our approach in this project with the ECR role, particularly when RAs are usually employed on time-limited and short-term contracts, and what happens to that collaboration and that repository.
As RAs, we have to remember that we also need to ensure that we organise how and where the materials we collect are stored, in case we decide to move on to another job and another ECR can pick up the work where we left off.
ECR, early career researcher. I find this such a difficult term. I'm 40, along with all of these women. I come from a background, a fairly established background in practice, or some of you have more academic backgrounds, and we hop from ECR to ECR to ECR until we're not really young junior researchers anymore. We're sort of mid-career researchers, really.
Own voice.
My name's Severin Penrose. I'm actually 39. I'm based at the UCL Institute of Archaeology working on this project. I have quite a long background, 12 or 13 years, with one particular planning consultancy as a heritage consultant, and I've worked across a lot of different policy projects, so I don't really even feel like a young researcher, because I have quite a thick background of research. Why I've come to this project is that as a practitioner, I've always tried to straddle the difference between practice and academia, so I've stepped over the border to try and do things that will help practice, because in practice we need to be helped, we need to be fed, but we need academics to do it for us. So that's my sort of meaning in this project and meaning in life, really. And I've wildly enjoyed it. It's been extremely challenging, and I found that I have a deep problem with academic admin.
So my name's Jenny Morgan. I'm a social anthropologist and I have a research and a professional background, both working in and studying museums. So before I came to the UK to do a PhD looking at change and everyday practice in the museum sector, I worked as a curator of pictorial collections at a regional museum in New Zealand. I now very much consider myself to be an organisational anthropologist and a work-based ethnographer, and I focused my research across various ECR projects where I've come to focus typically on the unseen and invisible aspects of organisational work practice. So that's led, for example, to an interest in sensory ethnography. Indeed, what I've really loved about working on this project is being able to extend and develop my ethnographic practice, particularly through the film training that we've had. I've really also enjoyed the collaborative partnership working. What I find most challenging about working on a project where I'm a grant-funded postdoc is really the very deep uncertainty, and I would also add ambivalence, I feel about my career, both within academia but also beyond, and indeed if I was to try and go beyond.
I'm Nadia Bartolini, and in my previous life I was a permanent employee in the Canadian federal government working in Aboriginal affairs. After moving to the UK and completing a PhD, I worked as a consultant researcher for 3 years and have been an RA on 2 AHRC projects. What I like about my current position is working collaboratively with these lovely people and also using film as an approach to research, which is new to me. What I find challenging is determining my own voice, and what I mean by this is that as an RA, I'm researching with aims and goals of a wider project, but this also means I feel like I'm losing touch with the passion that got me doing a PhD in the first place, since my initial interests are taking a backseat to wider project needs.
Hi, I'm Sarah May, and I'm 51, so very much established in my career, though not necessarily in an academic career. I come from an archaeology background, and I've studied every period from the Neolithic through to now the future, with the single exception of the medieval period, which never really interested me. Through all that, I followed a threaded landscape and how it holds complex relations between people in the material world. I've worked in the private sector, running excavations and other research. I've worked in the public sector, managing and conducting research for English heritage, and I've worked in academia, and I've run my own consultancy. As you can tell from that list, I love new challenges and working with new people. And so for this project, I really enjoyed working with the big concepts that the project deals with, in particular in working with these women here. On the flip side, those things I find most exciting are also the parts I find most challenging. Dealing with the very large concepts in the project can sometimes feel overwhelming, and I find the precarious ECR conditions undermine the excitement of exploration and discovery. But what next for the project?
Where next for us?